Hi viewers, in this video we're going to talk about the complete movie of Rebel Moon. We'll discuss the movie story, summarize the plot and explore the cast and characters. Additionally, we'll cover the movie production details and box office performance. Finally, we'll provide a review and share some personal reactions. Let's begin with the story. So movie has basically two parts. Let's start with the part 1. The film opens with the voice of an android named Jimmy, narrating over the history of the Mother World. The pursuit of power led to the royal's family conquest until an assassin murdered the king and queen. A tyrant named Belzarius, who leads the forces of Mother World, sends his brutal second-in-command Admiral Atticus Noble into the far reaches of the Mother World to seek out those who plan to rebel a rebellion. On the planet Veld, a named woman Cora tends to her crops before meeting her friend Gunnar to go to harvest celebration in the village. The village chief Sindri addresses his people while a hunter named Dan has eyes for Cora, though she has no interest in a romantic relationship. While out with her friend Sam, Cora sees Motherworld ships descending upon Veld. The community discuss how to approach the visitors before three smaller ships led by Noble arrive in the village. Noble speaks to Sindri over potential rebels in the land, as well as questioning him over the supply of crops they yield. Gunnar had sold several crops to enemies of the Mother World. After a tense exchange, Noble shoots Sindri to death in front of his people, along with another woman. He demands to Gunnar that the village hand over their gear and supply within 10 weeks. Elsewhere in the village, a young soldier named Ares appears to take a liking to Sam but must watch as his superiors taunt her. He also briefly speaks to Jimmy, who talks to Sam about Princess Issa, daughter of the slain king and queen, who perished along with their parents on that day. Jimmy laments how Issa was supposed to usher in a new era of kindness, only for it to be taken away so cruelly. The villagers debates on how to handle Noble and his men, with some offering to appeal to their humanity. Cora later sees some of the soldiers harass Sam and attempts to rape her, even as Ares tries to stop them. Cora enters the barn with an ox and proceeds to slaughter the soldier until the captain holds Sam at gunpoint. Jimmy enters and the captain orders to kill Cora, but Jimmy instead shoots him. This is enough to convince Cora they need to fight back, since Noble will kill off the villagers when he returns. Cora leaves Veld with Gunnar to seek out a group of insurgents called the Blood Axis, who may aid them against the forces of Belzarius. Cora tells Gunnar about how she witnessed the slaughter of the community at the hands of the tyrant when she was a child, and she was faced with an opportunity to kill him when confronted with him, but her weapon was out of munitions. Instead of killing her, Belzarius has taken Cora, trained at the Emporium along with other soldiers, under the name of Arthelis, turning her into a killer before she deserted them. Despite being groomed into being a mercenary with no emotional connection, Cora had a lover who was killed in the battle. Cora and Gunnar arrive in the port city of Providence to seek out the man who may lead them into Blood Axis. When the two mention General Titus, a nearby man named Kai begins to pay attention. Cora and Gunnar are accused by a thug who attempts to sexually assault Gunnar before Cora knocks him down. A nearby aliens tell Cora and Gunnar about Titus' whereabouts before the thug returns with backup. Cora and Gunnar fight and kill them until the main thug was Cora at gunpoint. Kai raises his firearms and blasts the thug in the head before introducing himself as a smuggler and joining Cora and Gunnar. Kai suggested to Cora that he knows a man who can aid them on their mission. He guided them to a ranch on another planet to find a man called Trock, who is being kept prisoner by the rancher, Hickman, due a debt Trock owes him. He is told about Cora's mission, and the three bargain with Hickman that if Trock can tame a nearby chained up creature called a Binu, then Trock can go free. Otherwise, all of them will be indebted to Hickman. Trock approaches the Binu and communicates with it. After freeing it, Trock rides the wild beast. He is granted freedom to join Cora, but as he leaves, he witnessed Hickman poorly handling the Binu, which ends with the creature killing Hickman by sticking its claw through his chest. Kai then leads Cora to a cobalt mining planet where they meet a swordsman called Nemesis. Kai informs her of the job just before she meets a hominid spider creature called Harada, who is keeping a small girl captive before preparing to kill her. Nemesis tries to negotiate with Harada but ultimately ends up battling the monsters and impales her fatally before serving the girl. Nemesis joins the rest of the crew. The experience makes Korra reminisce over how she spent time as the royal guard of Issa when she served the Imperium. She witnessed Issa bring a bird back to life, and the king had believed Korra being her friend made her feel safe, but Korra clearly feels guilt over what happened to Issa and her parents. The crew goes to a meet that holds a gladiator arena where Titus is. Once an Imperium general, he now lives disgraced on the streets and works as a prize fighter after his previous failure in the battle. While Titus remains ashamed of this past, Korra convinced him to fight back so he can get his revenge. The crew then goes to the planet Charon, where they meet King Levitica, so that they can make the Blue Dex's siblings Darien and Devra, in the hopes that Gunnar's previous connection with them may give them a chance to convince them to join the rebellion. The two have no desire to help until Korra gives them a speech. Daria then gives his own speech to this clan, the half of them joining them and the other half going with Devra. Noble and his crew, the King's Gaze, have been tracking the Blue Dexes and later turn up on the scene after the insurgents retreats, and he kills Leviticus before slaying siege to the area. Kai guards the crew to a trading post under the guise that he is dropping off goods before setting for a better life, but he was actually in cahoots with Noble his whole time and was trying to collect the bounties on the heads of Korra and the others. Noble has them captured and reveals he knows more about the crew than they let on. Trock is actually a prince while Nemesis kills several Imperium soldiers to revenge her murdered children. When Goran is ordered to execute Korra, he instead grabs the weapons and uses it to kill Kai. A battle breaks out between the Freed rebels and the King's Gaze. Darien gives his life to bring down a ship and saves as many of his people as he can. Most of the villains are killed before Korra and Noble have their showdown atop the post highest platform. After an intense fight, Korra overpowers Noble and knocks him off the ledge. The crew return to Wild and enjoy their temporary victory, but they are aware that the Imperium will soon retaliate. Korra brings her new friends back to her village more hopeful for their future than before. An Imperium ship recovers Noble's body and starts to revive him. His mind is taken to a realm where he communicates with Belisarius. Despite thinking he will be happy to know about Noble finding Korra, Belisarius is instead angered and demands that Noble will bring Korra to him so that he may kill her personally. The part 1 ends here. We'll talk about the part 2 later. First of all, let's know the cast of the part 1. The main cast of the Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child Fire, is Sofia Boutella as Korra, Djimon Hounsou as Titus, Mikael Hausman as Gunnar, E.D. Shireen as Atticus Noble, Baiduna as Nemesis, Ray Fisher as Darien, Anthony Hopkins as Jimmy, the voiceover, Charlie Hunnam as Kai, Stasnier as Trock, Farah Free as Belisarius, Stuart Martin as Dane, Kolpra Cologne as Devra, Ingvar Sigurdsson as Hagen, Alfonso Herrera as Cassius, Ryan Reese as the Queen, Cary Elwes as the King, Elsie Duffy as Melcius, Gina Malona as Harmanda, Carlotte Mackie as Sam, Sky Zhang as Aris, Steel Grace Fitzgerald as Princess Issa, Brandon Orett as Funance, Ray Porter as Hickman, Tori Amtrona as King Levitica. Let me explain the biography of the famous actors. The first one is Korra. Sofia Boutella is an Algerian actress, dancer and model. She was born in the Bab el-Khair district of Algeria in Algeria. The daughter of composer and jazz musician Safi Boutella and an architect mother. She started classical dance education when she was 5 years old in 1992. At age 10, she left Algeria with her family and moved to France, where she started rhythmic gymnastics, joining the French national team at age 18. Sofia started with hip-hop and star dance. She was part of a group called the Vincent Crew. She also participated in a group called Ventity and Arpotek. She was been arranged since 18 with Christopher Blandly and danced in several film and television appearances as well as commercial and concert tours. In 2007, her breakthrough arrived when she was picked for the Jimmy King biography of Nike as a role model of fitness and hip-hop. She was a major boost to her career and led to more work alongside stars like Madonna in her Confession tour and Rihanna. Sophia successfully auditioned for Michael Jackson's This Is It tour but could not attend due to extension of Madonna's tour, whose dates conclusion with Jackson's residency. In February 2011, she was the main character in Meta's last music video Michael Jackson Hollywood Tonight 2011. Sophia played the recluse Eva in the drama The Street Dance 2. He started as the assassin Godzilla in Kingsman: The Secret Service 2014. An alien warrior named Jala in the Star Trek Beyond 2016, the main antagonist Prince Ahmed in Universal's Dark, the film The Mummy 2017, and an undercover French agent in Atomic Blonde 2017, alongside Charlize Theron, and many other great movies like Rebel Moon 2013 to 2014. Her mother is an architect and her father, Saifi Betila, is a jazz musician. In 1992, the family moved from Algeria to France in the middle of the Algerian Civil War. In 2007, her breakthrough as dancer came when she was chosen for the Jamie Kim choreography of Nike's Women Keep Up campaign, serving as a role model of femininity and hip-hop. This was a major boost in her career and led to more work alongside stars like Madonna. In her Confucius tours and Rihanna, she credited her work with Madonna for helping her learn English. Michael Jackson was so impressed with her dancing that while she was touring the Madonna, he offered her a spot on this tour, although the tour never happened. An account of Jackson's death on June 25, 2009, she appeared as the lead in the music video of Bezos's release song Hollywood Tonight. She began classical dance education at age 5, began rhythmic gymnastics at 10, and joined the French national team at age 18. She then attended and graduated from Berklee College of Music in Boston. She took up hip-hop and street dance. She was part of a group called the Vision Crew when she won the Battle of the Year 2006. She also participated in a group called Chennai DV and Prohibitors created by Munu from the Visions Crew. She has credited Fred Astaire, Daniel Billas and Bob Soos as artists influenced. Now let's talk about our main villain, Eddie Skrein. Eddie Skrein grew up in North London, graduated with a degree in Fine Arts from Central St. Martin's, and is one of the most highly versatile artists of this generation. He was selected by Skrein International as one of their Stars of Tomorrow in 2013, which showcases the next generation of talent from the UK. Most recently, Skrein started as the villain Ajax in Marvel's and 20th Century Fox box office hit Deadpool 2016, directed by Tim Miller and alongside Ryan Reynolds. The film shattered box office records nearing $5 million worldwide. Deadpool 2016 chronicled the story of Marvel comic book character Deadpool Ryan's, a former Special Forces operative turned mercenary who adopts an alter ego after being subjected to a rough experiment that leaves with the accelerated healing power. Skrein also recently started in the Danish drama The Model 2016, directed by Mads Matthew, who won the World Cinema Dramatic Award of the film Teddy Bear at the 2012 SATAC Film Festival. The Model 2016 follows an emerging fashion model attempting to enter the punchier fashion scene who developed a deadly ovation at the top fashion photographer Shane White. Nordic Film Distribution released the film in Denmark on February 18th. This year, Skrein will appear in the comedy crime film Tell Your Friend 2015, directed by Owen Horrick and alongside Nicole Holt and James Corden. Based on John Navy's 2018 novel, the films account the story of a 17-year-old ARN man working at the height of the Bitcoin music craze and goes to extreme in order to find his next hit. Kill Your Friends 2015 screened at Cannes and was broadcast by Valgo USA Entertainment, which will release the film on April 1. Last year, Skrein started in the action crime thriller reboot The Transporter Refuel, directed by Camille Desmer and produced by Luc Besson and Mark Cho. Skrein portrayed the lead role of the Mark Martin, a former special ops mercenary who spent his life as a transporter of classified package for questioned people on the other side of the law. In 2000, Skrein appears in the critically acclaimed The BAFTA and Critics' Choice Television Award-winning HBO series Game of Thrones. Skrein portrayed the character Darion Harris, originally a lieutenant in the Second Sons, who takes over the company after killing his superiors and allying with Daenerys Targaryen, Emilia Clarke. In 2012, Screen started the Revolver Entertainment's critically acclaimed drama Manors. Written and directed by Ben Drew, the film revolves around the lives of 8 characters as they struggle to survive on the streets. It takes place over the course of 7 days, each story building into the others, painting a gritty picture of the world on the brink of destruction. Other films credited include The Sweeney, Tiger House, Piggy Northman, A Viking Saga, Sword of Vengeance, and Goldfish. Other television including The Tunnel and The Rebel Moon. The next character is Michael Haussmann, boosts an exciting career on both the small and large screen. He is currently shooting a lead role in Zack Snyder film Rebel Moon for Netflix. He will next be seen as Prince in the Apple TV series Echo 3 opposite Luke Evans and created by Mark Paul. Most recently, he was seen in the Netflix A Boy Called Christmas opposite Sally Hawkins and Dame Maggie Smith and the Spectrum Originals Limited series Angela Black. Michael's film credit includes starring role in The Malgorza Simpsons, The Other Lamb, A Supposed to Haunt, The Last Ride, Mike Neville's The Personal Literacy, and Potato Peel Pie Society opposite Lily James. Additional film credit include Netflix Irreplaceable You, Guidance Gate, Red Sea, Driving Rod, The Age of Adeline opposite Blake Lively and Harrison Ford. Will directed by Gene Marsvalli opposite Reese Witherspoon, World War Z opposite Brad Pitt. The Invitation directed by Karen Cosma, The Young Victoria opposite by Emily Blunt. On television, McGill is best known as series regular Tyrion Harris on HBO's of Game of Thrones. He started in season 1 of HBO Max The Flight Attendant opposite Kelly Coco and Netflix The Haunting of Hill House. Further television credit include occurring role in Orphan Black, Neville as a series regular in HBO's 3 Discovery Channel's Ministries Harley and Davidson, and the BBC television movies Margaret. Our next character is Djimon Hounsou. Djimon Hounsou biography. Djimon Hounsou was born in Kato Benin in West Africa of Albrine and Parsi Hounsou, a cook. He moved to leave France when he was 13. Hounsou was graced the catwalks of Paris and London as a popular male model. He was since left his modeling career and worked in on Gladiator 2000 by Ridley Scott and Amster 1997 by Stephen Galbraith. Came to Paris from Benin at the age of 13, could not find a job and ended up a vagrant, sleeping under bridges and remaining in trash cans for food. Things changed for the better when fashion designer Thierry Mugler discovered and made him a fashion model. Learned English by watching television. Name Perron's Djimon Hounsou. A light male to receive an Oscar nomination for acting. The 7 others are 1963 Sydney Portrait for Lilies on the Field, Best Actor 1992 Lois Bassett for An Office and Gentleman, Best Opportunity Actor 1989 Denzel Washington for Glory, Best Supporting Actor, J.R. for Jerry, Best Supporting Actor, Denzel Washington for Training Day, White Walker for The Last King of Scotland, Best Actor. The adventure of Korra and her friends in the Netflix movie Rebel Moon doesn't end up with Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire. Their story continues in the highly anticipated sequel Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scar Giver. The movie takes us back to a world full of intrigue and resistance where Korra and her friends must face new, bigger and most dangerous challenge. In Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scar Giver will see deeper character development and more complex conflicts. With the weight of the past and the hopes of the future hanging on the shoulder, Korra and her friends must embrace their fate and continue their fight against the forces of oppression. Their sequel promises to not only explore new aspects of the Rebel Moon universe, but also features more intense combat, smarter strategies, and close bonds between the characters. The Dunia Games has summarized everything you need to know if you follow Rebel Moon. In fact, Rebel Moon Part 2 is the sequel to the science fiction movie Rebel Moon by director Zack Snyder, which will be divided into 2 movies. The first part of the movie is entitled Rebel Moon, A Child of Fire, which will be broadcast starting December 2nd, 2023 on Netflix. Meanwhile, the second part, Rebel Moon Part 2, will be broadcast in 2024 with the title Rebel Moon, The Scar Giver, which will also air on Netflix. Rebel Moon by Zack Snyder itself is a movie that tells the story of the character Korra, who makes an emergency landing on the moon in the farthest part of the universe. She then lived among a farming community which she became involved in a war against Mother World. Quoted from IMDb, Rebel Moon Part 2, the Scar Giver will tell the story of Korra and the surviving soldier preparing to defend the world and their people against nature. In Part 2, the fighter will be their past as well as reveal the motives before the Rom troops arrive to crush the crawling rebellion. First thing first, I did not hate Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire. I didn't love it, I didn't hate it. It came away from the movie that mixed feeling. Then again, I have mixed feeling about the first Star Wars, which I do love, but which is unwillingly a rough rate of which George Lucas and this collaboration eventually came up with across the original trilogy. Rebel Moon is not a trilogy, and that's my first complaint. I am not a fan of these two-part movies. A movie should be one film or three films. Two is an awkward number, especially for what is obviously intended to be a major space opera epic. Too much and too little were attempted and craved in Part 1. The pacing is a mess, it moves too slowly much of the time, yet the story, important pieces like character development are rushes through and glares over. My second complaint is that so much of the movie makes so little sense. Yes, I can understand how a giant space empire needs food to feed its soldier. So I can't see how a group of 5 or 6 warriors, even supplemented with 3 or 4 god of rebel fighters, will be able to fight off a massive dreadnought ship and its battalion of well-armed troops. I like the twist and the betrayal towards the end of the movie, but I thought the means by which our heroes escaped quite precious. Who designed those scorpion chairs robots? They are very cool, but why should you make the paralyzed device the same as the key? And how would the farmer Gunnar know that? It would have made more sense for Kai to be playing a deeper, twisted game here. Rebel Moon Part 1 functioned like the beginning of Seven Samurais or the Magnificent Seven, or well, the Three Amigos. A village comes under threat by a powerful enemy and a group of rough-around-the-edge heroes are gathered to help the villagers fight back. The problem here is scale. If Cider had made the enemy a group of speed pirates or some kind of evil speed biker gangs or something, fine. Even just a local officer mining this planet who cracked down too forcefully, but we are talking about a massive, multi-star system force that consists known separatists and willing to throw all its might at these villagers. I don't buy it. The actually gathering of the heroes is also poorly paced. We get a massively intended scene of Tarok breaking and riding a space Gifton with a lot of center slow-mo to slow things down further. Torn straight off the Harry Potter hip-hop scene, but then they see a General Titus, a solitary tank now but still ripped. It's for motivational speed and off we go. Rebel Moon is basically PG-13 Star Wars in a lot of ways. You will not hear that kind of language in a galaxy far away. Aaron had seen the attempted sexual assault, but it's never as charming or funny. The characters are not terrible, but the most likable among them end up being a bad guy. There's not nearly enough comic relief, which director like Xander seemed to never realize help as care and bond the characters so that we care about when bad things happen to them. Comic relief helps create tension. I could go on and know about all the little things that didn't make sense in the movie, but the long and short of it is simple. With a little more time and stronger script, this could have been a Redmere space opera. Instead, it was barely enjoyable. I didn't find it half so terrible as the review made it sound. All the worst movies ever talk seems rather over the top and breathless to me. In fact, I'd say I like more than any of Xander's films since the old days of 300, Watchmen and the Dawn of the Dead. Sure, it's directed in Star Wars. I'm fine with director work, especially in the swords and planning genre. John Carter was around long before Dawn. I don't bracket Frank Herbert in drifting off the age rise breakthrough, or George Lucas drifting off a hybrid, and Erika Kurosawa or Zack Snyder drifting all of the above. I have had my own ideas of Sword and Planet and samurai stories. We are all influenced by a million things. The problem with Rebel Moon is that it doesn't do enough to establish itself as something unique and coherent. Maybe that will change when we have part 2, but I wish Xander had come up with some better hooks some more obvious way to make this universe special and distant rather than just a hodgepodge of other people's ideas. And yet, the same time it felt mostly very capable as somewhat darker, edgy Star Wars, wooden characters and film strip alongside. I enjoyed the actions and was mostly entertained throughout. If anything, it suffered from many of the same problems the sequel trilogy suffered from, which were often pacing issue. Recall the original Star Wars trilogy did such a great job at two things. First, it gave us great characters we cared about. Second, it spent meaningful time establishing a sense of place in each of its films. We got to know planets like Tatooine, Dagobah, Hoth, the Moon of Inger, the Death Star, Cloud City, and so forth. In the sequel trilogy, in the Rebel Moon, the places we go are barely established at all and utterly unforgettable. The characters have potential, but we hardly scratch the surface. Still, I like them for the most part. I like Sofia Boutell's Korra. I almost titled this crew The Legend of Korra. Though I wish Sander had picked better ways to reveal her past to us than Locke's exposition lesson flashback. Charlie Hunnam's Skies was a lot of fun. Though he, like all the others, gets a little lost in the mix of introducing so many characters in so short a span. The robot Jimmy is an instant favorite thanks to the wonderful voice work from Anthony Hopkins. More Jimmy please. Digimon housing General Titus didn't get enough screen time at all. Perhaps half of these characters should have been introduced in the second movie in the fiction trilogy. I wish this was. The Michael Houseman, Gunnar and Bygona sword-wielding nemesis, not to mention the surprisingly sympathetic spider monster lady she fights. Eddie Secrane makes a terrific villain as Admiral Atticus Noble, even if he is walking lychee and a better dressed Star Wars Imperial. Meanwhile, the special effects, sound design, costumes, and cinematography were all top notch. I really like this film's take a laser blaster which pop holes right through people. Nemesis swords are not quite Labrysix, though they look like that in the trailer. Rather, they are normal swords that heat up in a growling fireplace. I just wish that all this attention to detail had been given a little more room to breathe, which is a sentiment I hold toward the characters and the dialogues as well. I suppose much of my enjoyment here is probably due to the exceptionally low expectation I came into the movie with. I was fully expecting it to be dreadful at every turn, but it was more like a food Joss burger. Not bad really, just nothing particularly unique and not the type of burger you'd get on a date. I enjoy a fast food burger from time to time though I can really hit the spot. Rebel Moon scratched the space opera itch I always in the same way John Carter did when the movie came out and bombed with critics and audience. And it did it without the force. It's no adore by any means, but it's no any worse with the Star Wars sequel trilogy, and I enjoyed it more than the prequel. At least there's no Jar Jar Binks. I am definitely going to watch part 2 and genuinely curious to see what happens. I'll probably even watch the director's cut when that comes out, should it have just been the version from the Star of Goodness Snakes, which is something I didn't have the stomach for with the Justice League. Just hearing the name Zack Snyder seems to invoke widely different impulses and reactions depending on which side of the filmmaker you sit. In one group you have the Sanders royalists who censored out and anything you put while pushing back on even the slyest criticism of this work. But just as feral and often more brightened as the anti-Sanders misleader who never passed us on the chance to battle and betrayed Sanders movies and his fans. This brings us to the latest project, Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire. Mark it down. You can expect fans to love it and defend it till their last breath. Meanwhile, Sander Kemper will be complying at the bit to tear it down early and often. But this is really, once you weed out the voice of the pretty boast and get beyond the hyperbole and grandstanding in Rebel Moon any good, it's actually quite good, although you can tell it's only a slice of bigger and better whole. The existence of a director cut is out there and this cut all confirm it. The Snyder creator, he gives us a gooder taste of the new original universe he has created. The world is full of vibrant and scarce location. There are plenty of interesting people, races and creatures, and the battle lines are currently discussed between an opposite organization regime and the valiant group of rebels who rise up to fight back. But they'll need a leader who can bring together the crisis warriors from across the galaxy if they are to have any chance of winning. That's hardly what you call an original story. But Xander is fine with that. He has not been any about honoring this inspiration, and he doesn't attempt to hide this open embrace of numerous classic science fiction hopes. He has set out to make a dark space fantasy that plays like Seven Samurai meets Star Wars. It's not his story in bold and unique. It's that is unfolding with character he has crafted within world he has created. Still, this cut of Rebel Moon is more interesting than fulfilling. I found myself throwing reviled within its world, yet it left me needing more of it. For example, the action in the version feels sanitized with the camera too often turned away to ensure a PG-13 rating. Xander had says his full cast is wilder and eager, but more than that, key supporting characters often feel like sketch rather than portraits. The motivation are weak and their background, which is the movie play a big part is defining them, are mostly mysterious. More than anywhere else in the films, it's here that the cut stands out most. The cast is made of an integrated array of talent led by Sofia Boutella. She plays Cora, who lives in a quiet life in a small, tight-knit farming village on the mostly peaceful planet of Fate. Through considered independence, Fate exists in the shadow of the Motherworld, which is ruled by Regent Pulsarius Farafree. The Motherworld has once devoted the peace and prosperity, but following the mysterious assassination of its king, queen, and princess, and then immediate senator Pulsarius rose to power. He created a massive military known as the Imperium and has used it to strengthen his reign and expand his empire. Cora's village is visited by an Imperium squad under the command of Admiral Atticus Noble, fighting a wild Edie Chikrin. He is on a mission to hunt down and destroy pockets of resistance that are believed to be hiding among the outer planets. Noble forces the village into a pact to provide an unreasonable amount of grain for his armies. He gives them 10 months to have it ready before showing them the consequences of failing him. After a group of remaining Imperium soldiers attempt to rape a young local girl, Cora kills them all, revealing a side of herself she has kept hidden from her community. Due to her secret past with the Imperium, Cora knows Noble will retaliate after hearing his soldiers are dead, so she can set off to recruit warriors to help stand against the Imperium. She convinces a fellow villager named Cora, who has connection with the resistance, to accompany her. They are helps of the planet by missionary and smuggler named Kai. From there, Xander wings us from one visually rich and interesting planet to the next, recruiting a new member to his band at each stop. They include a former Imperium general, a Cabrok swordmaster, a prince in bond, and a vice freedom fighter. Together they mark a formidable team despite many of them lacking in individual detail. As with other Xander movies, Rebel Moon features most of the filmmaker's usual trademark. There's a jaw-dropping CGI, lots of stylish slow motion, and crispy choreographic action sequence, all of it shot by Xander himself. And as the story progresses, we got several fun notes to past movies, television shows, and genres. As the full title clearly indicates, this is just the first part of Xander opus, but that does bring to united climax before setting up the next film due out in April. Of course, before the next film release, we will be getting an extended cut of part 1 in early 2024. The big question: why release the film like this? From every indication it was a Netflix decision. It seems Xander was given the green light to go nuts and create whatever he wanted under the agreement that Netflix would release a netted PG-13 version first. Was it to make the version that was suitable for a broader audience? Was it some Blizzard technique to try and recreate the Xander Z kill? Either way, the cut continually entertained me, but did it most was exciting for me, potentially better extended and just a corner around. Rebel Moon Part 1 Ending Explain. 2023 has had plenty of films that are the first half of a two-part story, and Zack Snyder Rebel Moon Part 1 A Childfire is no exception. The space opera which spun out of a former Star Wars which Xander has connected. Enter on the mysterious Cora, Sofia Boutella. Having escaped the tyrannical armies of the Motherworld, Cora is making a peaceful life for itself on the moon of Fate, but trouble arrives when Admiral Atticus Noble, Edie Chikrin and its forces demand Will's entire grain supply for the Motherworld. With nowhere else to go, Korra decides to recruit Various to defend Vade's people against the Motherworld's forces. There's a lot going on. The Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire. Not only is Xandar attempting to create an entirely new universe, but Netflix is pushing for Rebel Moon to be its next big franchise, to the point where the streamer moved up the film's release date and has been heavily promoting it at conventions. With critical exception has been less than 8 years. The consequences is the film's end with the perfect lead to the Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scar Giver. So how exactly does A Child of Fire end? The bulk of Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire focuses on Korra's journey to assemble a fighting force to defend Veld. Joining her for the rides is Gunnar, a follow farmer carrying a torch for Korra and Galt overlanding Veld in the Motherworld's crossover, and Kai, a thief pilot who carried the farmer to ship. Korra ends up assembling a crew of skilled fighters that include the Saber swordsman Nemesis, farmer Prince Tarak, and the help of Dorian Blood Axis and his assistant Devra. Prior to the events of Child of Fire, Gunnar had souls which supplied grain to the Blood Axis. Through Devra is hastened to help. Daria lends a few of his forces to Korra's house. Things take a turn from the worse when Kai seals out the other rebels to Noble. As it turns out, each of them has been an outlaw in their own way. Darian and his forces had made strategic hits against the Motherworld. Tarek opposed their Titus lead and unprising that lead to the loss of his men, and Nemesis slaughtered Motherworld offices as retaliation of losing her children. The big surprise is Korra as Noble reveals that she is the Scar Giver. Former bodyguard to the slain Princess Issa and the most wanted fugitive in the known universe. Gunnar finally finds redemption by freeing the rebels and killing Kai, leading to intense firefight. The battle ends on a sober note as Darian sacrifices himself to take out a Motherworld gunship. Said gunship also discriminates the rebel fighter, which reveals Korra, Gunnar, Titus, Nemesis Truck, and eventually Melius to return to Vade as the rebels stride into the sunlight. They are unaware that Jimmy, the last of race of Mechanical Knight, built to protect Issa and her family, is wandering the fields of Veld. Jimmy had admitted the feeling lost of following Issa's death, but he helped Korra defend her friend Sam from Motherworld soldier while also telling Sam that she reminded him of Issa. It took as tough Jimmy may find his purpose in defending Veld from the Motherworld. Korra's quest to find Various runs parallel to Noble's own mission. He was tasked by Motherworld to hunt out and extinguish any pockets of insurgency and does so with terrifying captaincy. Anyone harboring or helping rebel forces find their world raised by the drag out known as the King's Case or the received end of the broad town from Noble's bone staff. In the same way that Korra is determined to protect her home, Noble is determined to crush any rebellion so that he can gain seat in the Motherworld Senate. The two have an intense battle in the final act that ends with Korra impaling Noble on his own blood staff and sending him falling to his apparent death. This being a sci-fi film, or more appropriately the first half of a two-part movie. Noble is rescued by the Motherworld's priest, who took him into the machine that allowed him to telepathically commune with Reginald Barrios. Balzarius tasks Noble with a new mission: wipe out the resistance on Vade and bring Korra to him alive. Balzarius has adopted her following the destruction of her homeworld and melded her into a fighting machine, and he wishes to personally kill her for her defenses. With Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scar Giver slated to premiere, as well as extensive cut of Child Fire on the way. Not to mention a comic mystery focus on the Blood Axis, it looked like Xandar only scratched the surface of Rebel Moon's universe. For some time, pop culture fans have been waiting for Zack Xandar Rebel Moon. No matter how divisive people taste or when it comes to Xandar movies, the majority will still watch just to decide if the director's balance, substance and style. Given the DCEU is not reporting into James Gunn's DCU, many are indeed intrigued to see that Parker Xandar is scripting and how he has involved and after cutting ties with Warner Bros. Discovery. The first chapter in Rebel Moon feels like the R-rated Star Wars movie Xandar once pitched, focusing a lot on Sofia Boutola's Korra trying to lead a rebellion against the impressive empire known as the Motherworld. It's all due to the villains threatening Korra farming colony on the moon Veld. However, while Rebel Moon Part 1 A Child of Fire ends on a terminus note of hope, inspiration and optimism, there is still a lot of danger lurking. Rebel Moon Part 1 A Child of Fire has Korra secreting way to Providence to locate allies. Along with Mitchell Hosman's Korra, the farmer that loves Korra, they are hoping to find people eager to take up arms. Charlie Human's Kai is a pilot, Rickism of Star Wars Han Solo and Poe Dameron who helps her with the job. Do they well rounding up various such as Titus, a former warrior in the Mutterverse military, the Imperium as well as Donna's Bay Nemesis, a sword Viking killer whose families were taken out by the Imperium. Ray Fisher's Tarian Blue Dexys enlisted too, carrying on his skin's legacy of waging her war against injustice. Satar Ray Starrick is another key warrior who has a cross with the military. However, right when they believe they are castle up more people as well as firepower, Kai sails them out. The Imperium arrives and captures them, making Kai more of a Lando Calrissian. However, Kai is not under duress like how Lando was at Cloud City. Lando caves under pressure to protect his season, offering up hand to Darth Vader and Imperial Planetium. In Kai's case, he seductively enjoys flipping fox over to the scientists so long as he can make money off them. When he met Korra, he immediately realized he could group together enemies, betray them and earn cash. He doesn't care if he's traitor, all they want is to get paid. His story is somehow sympathetic, though as Kai confirmed his family died at the Motherward's hand. Thus he became a servant, siding the enemy of a prevent his life and making a living. He lost his heart and soul along the way, culminating in his trying to force Connor to murder his restrained Korra, part of it to carry favor with the Imperium's main Admiral Noble, E.D. Sakharine. But the other part is because Kai loves seeing people suffer under the Imperium the way his people did. Speaking to her, all the trauma and grief broke him into becoming a selfish individual. While Connor seems like he'll shoot Korra through the neck, he actually frees her. A major firefighter breaks out, allowing Korra to free the rest of the resistance. The hero starts shooting up noble forces, with Gunnars actually finishing up by shooting a nail through his arm. There are losses through named Barian. He perishes when he tries to bring down the warship, the Dreadnought, which basically acts as his poverty star destroyer. Korra, however, perseveres and gets her hands on Noble. She uses his staff to pommel him. She stabs him as well, before dropping him off the platform to his death. They gives her revenge for all who killed her community's leader, simply just to imitate the farmers. Of course, Gunnar is to blame as he sold the rebels some of their excesses grain desperate to make the commune money in the past, but Noble didn't just return to scare and punish them. He also keeps demanding most of them harvest, which is why Korra realizes she had to jump into action. The irony is that she was a body whose family got killed by the Imperium. She ended up being taken in the General Balzarius as a kid after becoming a killer in the army, and then had her looking after the royal's family, but once the royal got assassinated in the mysterious hit, Korra felt and adapted his new identity. Therefore, she has a payback in mind, not just for what she has done to the royal, particularly Pisa princess, but for the agency and life Balzarius took from her. No matter what, she will not see wealth on any other option. This is why he takes the variant back to the farm, ready to have them trained to immune and create a proper army. One would think is a mission accomplished, but there is a terrifying twist in the final moment. It's implied Balzarius might have been responsible for the royal death in the Rebel Moon story, especially as he took over the Mother Face and become the new regent. He is basically the Palpatine of this story, with Noble as his god of war or his own Darth Vader. Shockingly, the Imperial retrieves Noble's mangled body and run a neutral pump-line, confirming Noble is part machine. Noble meets his boss in the cloud. There, Balzarius is admitted that Noble will get a second chance upon finding out Korra is alive. He wants her deliverance since on reestablishing their father-daughter relationship of old when he enslaved and unconditioned her. However, it's not going to be a reunion filled with forgiveness. The new king wants to slaughter her in a public execution as a statement. It's meant to drive fear in the public and show what happened to people who backstab him. Sure, a portion of him loves her despite burning her rom and making her the racial child of fire, but they involve star for emotion as a accomplice. A Skag Noble agrees to the task, ending the fully filmed revise on one main directive attain Korra as she can taught a lesson in the Rebel main sequence. Rebel Moon Part 1 is quite towards using too many clutches and sacrifice drops. It doesn't feel original or impressive with all the Star Wars magic. It doesn't have that there is not much backstory scene of the chosen ribbons. Everything feels too idealistic and plot convenient. But the hunt does give Dob to Noble. He is terrified of his boss and it left with no choices but to show the Imperium he is not fled. He lost one war but his ego will ensure the remainder strong as well as the rebound. What does work even better is now the film pivot quickly to Belzarius, a ruler with a personal mission. It's not all about politics like Palpatine, but about awareness to show the realm and he has to assemble like Grodd under. His actions are a tad part, but the show of strength is the only way to send a statement to all the rebels. To top it off, the mastery regarding which seems to be a cop in driving the plot forward in a big way. The narrative might not have been executed properly, but there is a lot behind how Itisa died and what happened to the life giver. Power in her that could strike the dead. Throw in mysterious like why Korra could not protect her and what role Korra may have played to the king and queen. There is a lot that still has to shown to make Korra's side appeal. Ultimately, it feels like a cosmic cat and mouse game with the many secrets and revelation to come. While these bombshell and Curtis Sander does need to make his horse interesting, give them more personality outside of Korra, and start trying to copy what George Lucas did with Star Wars. Sander's villains are decent enough, but these heroes lack a sense of identity that would make them proper foe against Nobles and Belzarius, who end the film with the upper hand and the element of surprise. Now let's talk about the full cast and crew of Rebel Moon. Sound Department: Garcia Aligiu, Sound Production Unit; Donna Chikak Henson as Utility Sound; Michael Bromberg as Foley Artist; Will Francis as ADR Recordist; Fridge Gomes as ADR Mixer; Dick Hansen as Production Mixer; Scott Hacker as Supervising Sound Editor; Caleb Helmbeck as Sound Recordist; Jaffrey A. Hemprise as Boom Operator; Nick Entaldi as Sound Effect Designer; Michael Caleta as Boom Operator; Andy Kwama as Re-Recording Mixer; Sam C. Lavish as ADR Mixer; Ariel MC Grail as Dialogue Editor; Alexander Pau as Sound Effects Designer; Steve Skyder as ADR Mixer; Jesse Annis Spence as Dialogue ADR Mixer; David Tichor as Re-Recording Mix Technician; Baron Wilson as Dialogue Editor; Martin Zub as Re-Recording Mixer; Auguste Alfezo as Sound Editor; Amanda Zohar as Mix Technician; Andrew Vernon as Sound Effect Designer; Gribton Bosch as Sound Designer; Brad Skoll as Assistant Sound Editor; Jamison Robb as ADR Mixer; Chuck McHale as Sound Designer; Clinton MC Maid as ADR Mixer; Nick Ray as ADR Mixer; Adrien Kelman as ADR Mixer; Brian Jordan as Sound Designer; James Hyde as ADR Mixer; Mike Hartoon as Foley Artist; Michael Harlane as Dialogue Editor; Gray Hacker as Supervising Foley Artist; Jeff Gross as Foley Mixer; Elaine Friedman as ADR Mixer; Curtis Evan as Sound Utility Second Unit; Michael Bombrick as Foley Artist. Now let's talk about the visual effects of Rebel Moon. Nick Abrakian as Visualization Artist; Andrew Pradhan-Adama as Crowd Layout Artist; Marisma An as Route Band Supervisor; Alireza Akarbani as Visual Effect Artist; Merlai Alfaro as Visualization Artist; Rolando Emerald as Visualization Artist OPSIS; Ryan Edison as Visual Effect Production Assistant; Sean Ennis as Visual Effects Department; Rodrigo as Armandiz, Composer; Paraful Aurora as Visual Effects Lighting; Daniel Ashon as Visual Effect Optical; Oliver Agist as Senior FTLT; Vishali Agwata as Digital Compositor; Grant Babbitt as Visual Effect Data Wrangler; Lana Barnes as Previous Producer; Lucas Packers as Compositor; Alessandro Barbosa as Environment Artist; Erato Sanz as visual effect grooming, Joan Corrido Bolen as senior compositor, David Beltran-Colico as FXTD frame store, Riccardo Beni as visual effect editor, Romain Bensard as VX supervisor, Ben Pekil as moderator, Bekpani Prakash Burhead as digital compositor, Nicola Bishop as layout technical director, Alina Blankova as digital effects production manager, Alice Baltimore as visual effects environmental artist, Tatiana Pozzo as VFX line producer, Steve Braggs as look we lead, Cordell Bridge as digital compositor, Tiffany Nicole Bromley as digital compositor, Heather Brown as senior lookage artist, Sammy Broughtout as visual effects asset, Vijay Bundela as senior lighting artist, Anthony Kelly as visual effects production manager, Darren Campbell as digital compositor, Aaron Carino as IT technician, Mariam C. Costello as FX frame store, Anna Kovassos as visual effect artist, and Dean Caponeus as compositor, Marco Chiza Garcia as lead compositor, Chick Chinchen as digital compositor, Keith Chalk as visual effects lead lighting artist, Van Mock Mark Choi as paint artist, Marvin Choa as lead lighting technical director, Andrea Collard as Mary Painter data VFX, Daniel Chon as compositing supervisor, Silvia Colonna Romano as visual effect 3D modeler, Ronnie Comey as visual effect 3D cyber character scene technician, Grace Cowan as cooperative artist, Daniel Kovic as digital compositor, frame store, Mark Azirk as digital compositor, Beta FX, Gupta Darpan as CP supervisor, Gently Davidson as senior roto artist, Meta VFX, Emil Davidi as system and network administrator, Nikli Deshmukh as lead animator, Vukadispovic as associate VFX producer, Santosh Kumar De as layout artist, Pedro Dietrich as watch move artist, Virginia Deneen as visual effect department manager, Jennifer Dutchery as visual effect department manager feature models, Atichi Doshi as FX artist, Naveen Babu Tonga as tracking artist, Thomas Todes as FXTD frame store, Stephen Dobek as moves move artist, Ashley Dutt as assistant visual editor, Vicent Deslett as senior animator, Colin Epson as head of environments, Samuel Artwade as visual effects lighting, Karim Tulkatan as lead environment TD, Brock Inian as visual effect lighting, Gabriel Escobar as roto paint, Brad Fake as visual effect coordinator, Ankiro Florteo as senior animator, Josh McGill for Race Victoria as texture artist, Brad Follett as composition supervisor, Taylor Fox as lead effects, Mikhail Frasio as digital compositor, Zach Fox as visual effect associate producer, Larkin Flynn as digital compositor, Francisca Flores as visual effect department manager, Brenda Chames Fleece as visual effect artist, Bernard Tagnon as visual effect lighting LTD framework, Maxime Flores as visual effect designer, Nathan Garden as producer, Valamdir Granmal as crowd TD, Bhumesh Kendri as prepaid artist, camera and electrical department, Alfred Answorth as key video assistance operator, Josh Precourt Jr. as rigging programmer, Braden Basford as first assistance camera, Douglas Pale as rigging system technician, Travis Brady as riding grip sub-foreman, Mike Cahoon as additional assistance camera, Ricky Carillo as rigging gaffer, Cedar Chalk as lighting plot draft person, John Clothier as camera operator, Joffrey A. Cook as best boy rigging electrical, Kyle Davis as grip, Matthew Ditches as chief lighting programmer, Blake Braham as Lightning Technician, Kevin Rambo Fortes as Grip, Brian Fritchall as Operator, Martin Garfies as Riding Electrical Technician, Eric Gorin as Fast Assistance Camera, David Hochler as Techno Technician, Alan Harker as Riding Electrical Gun Boss, Evan Hoth as Electrical Lighting Technician, Jason Hebarger as Labrier Technician, Dallin Holman as Lightning Technician, Benjamin Hopkins as Additional Phantom Technician, Badley J. Jenkins as Riding Grip Gang Boss, Dan Jones as Gaffer, William Kent as Riding Up Foreman, Trucker Court as Camera Operator, Al Albreda as Riding Grip, Caleb Livingstone as Grip, Charles R. Matthews as Rest Boy Grip, Carla Mendoza Mayer as Digital Loader, Kevin Miles as Second Assistance Camera, Andrew Kevin Esrio as Constructional Rigging Grip, Mike Perrier as Second Assistance Camera, Craig Rayleigh Jr. as Grip, Ragelson Rivers Lighting Technician, Matthew Chris San Jose Rigging Grip, Tom Saber Riding Electrical Technician, Chris Solon Second Assistance Camera, Chris Stalker as Still Photographer, Joel Sutherland as Lightning Programmer, Mikhail Van Wangenen as Grip, Adam Veda Best Boy Grip, Great Weight Rigging Grip, Morgan Whitey Additional Digital Utility, Bobby Wu Additional Dolly Grip, Avova Yaffe Grip, Dallin Holman Features Technician, Uncredited, Jordan C. Kadwitz Take Operator Additional Photography, Zach Marchiski Digital Image Technician, Douglas McMurray Remote Head Technician, and Ryan Rembrandts Leader Visual Effects Elements, Stephen Taylor Weir First Camera Technician, Bryce Palmer Library Technician, Kevin McCardell Camera Production Assistants, Caleb Livingstone Rigging Grip, Milan Jennison Camera Operator, Giovanni Wilco Set Lighting Technician, Brian Wright Video Playback Engineer, Darren Wong Dolly Grip, Martin Weeks Additional Lightning Programmer, Deegan Van Losbeck Grip, Ryan Wolfsburg Dolly Grip, Ray Valerio Rigging Grip, Brad Struggler Electrician Lighting Technician, Chris Saul Electrician, Zach Sleeth Best Boy Fixtures, George Panto Petrio Telecorate Technician, Israel Rivas Riding Electrical Gang Boss, Nick Reportella First Lighting Technician, Edson Reyes Digital Utility, Vincent Parker Video Playback Engineer, Greg Mitchell Key Video Assistants, Lai Mirk Electrical Lighting Technician, Dallin Jospe Mayberry Electrical Lighting Technician, Justin M. Lopin Still Photographer, John Lifan Grip, Didier Kosef Key Grip, Erica Kim Chief Lighting Technician 2nd Unit, Illy Just Features Lighting Technician, Lorraine Johnson Electrical Lighting Technician, Stale Hunter Best Boy Rigging Grip, Jordan Hotland Rigging Programmer, Mark Hoffman Supervising Playback Engineer, Tom Highland Platinum Camera Operator, Rick Harris Key Rigging Grip, Evan Ayer Key Video Assistance Operator, Nathan H. Hayden Video Assistance Operator, Joshua College Digital Imaging Technician, Gianna Garcia Video Production Assistants, Eric Fleetwood Electrical Lighting Technician, Jack Fadedgal Camera Operator, Calais Noss Still Photographer, Ediaro T. Limora Grip, Black Collins First Assistance Camera, Vicky Santora Camera Protection Assistants, David M. Chuson Rigging Electrician, Ryan Consulishu Rigging Grip, Trevor Pratap Telrine Operator, Bomb Bradshaw Best Boy Grip, Victoria Bandcos Digital Utility, Fernando Boris Rigging Grip Sub-Foreman, Ginny Blistki Riff Technician. Now let's talk about the music department of Rebel Moon. Ashley Andrews, Assistant Engineer. Anne Bernard, Music Librarian. Michael K. Bohr, Music Editor. Richard Besley, Musician French horn. Dolan Ponce, Compositor. Gover Complaint, Technical Score Engineer. Ben Chessy, Assistant Engineer. Nicole Dia, Music Executive. Raphael Forrest, Compositor, Additional Music. Gavin Greenway, Conductor. Tom Holkborn, Score Orchestrator. Daijo Astrich, Musician, French born. Will Jones, Assistant Engineer. George Lloyd Owen, Assistant Engineer. Amy Lurden, Singer. Jack Mills, Score Recordist. John Patricelli, Musician. Tom Pigott-Smith, Orchestra Leader. James Pigan, Music Production. Brad Ritchie, Music Preparation. Michael Sagerson, Music Editor. Michael Anthony Stafflet, Technical Score Engineer. Jamie Thurman, Assistant Orchestrator. Golia Vilsari, Vocalist. Henry Wickinson, Orchestrator. Nick Colleg, Score Engineer. Bright Ward, Music Executive. Edward Trabick, Score Orchestrator. Jill Streeter, Music Librarian. Patrick Savage, Musician. Jack Roberts, Compositor. Harry Rosalio, Record Engineer. John Prestige, Score Recordist. Ben Pori, Vocal Contractor. Sam Aldrin, Vocalist. Alain Mearson, Music Scoring Mixer. London Voices, Core. Maxwell Karazine, Musician, Violin and Viola. Somoda Chocolata, Vocalist. Rebecca Harden, Assistant Engineer. Benjamin Hoff, Assistant Orchestra. Brad Garden, Music Executive. Luca Fergandini, Compositor, Addition Music. Caroline Dale, Scolist, Chilo. Jordan Box, Music. Ching Chen Chung, Composer, Additional Music. Christopher Blackmon, Music Librarian. Jonathan Beard, Score Orchestrator. Shane Brad, Assistant Orchestrator. Lawrence Allo, Vocal Produced and Mixed. Costume and Wardrobe Department. Anthony Almaraz, Key Military Costume. Javier Arita, Costume Supervisor. Nicholas Brown, Assistant Costume Designer. Lawrence Kynes, Key Customer. Kenan Castro, Costume Supervisor. Natalie Kate, Additional Costumer. Mackenzie Cleveland, Set Consumer. Jennifer Ashley Collin, Principal Set Customer. Sofia Coronado, Specially Costume Manufacturer. Tansine Cotello, Assistant Costume Designer. Kathleen Deoba, Customer Kathleen Perrier. Sharon Fowell, Key Special Textile Costume. Annie Gritty, Costume Coordinator. S.B. Joffrey, Set Customer. Darren Cordine, Specialty Costume Prepper Technician. Scott R. Farfin, Technical Costume. Gozan Joris, Customer. Nicole Raikipian, Cutter Filter. Jessica Lewis, Tailor Filter. Julia Lecon, Customer. Corey Mansfield, Key Customer Additional. Erich Muller, Customer Warboard. Jason Pastrana, Costume Concept Artist. Kristen Froffer, Key Customer. Carol Savdra, Customer. Sina Shanti, Costume Buyer. Jamie L. Stephens, Manufacturing First Person. Andre Ripoli, Third Scanning Technician. Alan Viloma, Costume Concept Artist. Seong Shin, Tailor Fitter. George Samau, Costume Illustrator. Grace Roffin, Set Customer. Kristen Proffer, Key Customer. Rabba Recret, Set Customer. Vincher Max, Set Customer. Nicole Manahan, Custom Made and Alteration. Alexander Likosova, Costume Assistance. Amanda B. Lander, Costume Cutter. Jimmy Kinney, Additional Customer. Zoe Hitz, Special Costume Key. Age Graskovi as Manufacturer 4-person. Javier G. Gonzalez, Manufacturer 4-man. Vicky Gilbert, Costume Buyer. Margaret Flesenza, Set Customer. Elizabeth Esterwing, Tailor Cutter Filter. Tom Commons key customer, Paul Arelsley key customer, Amy Kennett additional customer, Cornetti Court special custom digital design, Sabin Clarity customer, Gavin Gaud Casto customer, Jason Castava concept illustration, Rita Lee Barton costume buyer, Christine Berg special costume key, Heather Armstrong Agar Dyer, additional crew, Mark Alpover studio teacher, Alessa Seppelstone assistant Z Zinder, Morgan Bateman animal wrangler, Robert Pivot digital asset manager, Behmood Biju marketing producer, Brian Bentley key medic, Frenchie Brown deadly coach, John Ponce medic, John Carr nurse, Wendy John clearance, Kelsey Klum horse wrangle, Alex Cowell base camp protection, Jordan D. Crabtree health and safety protection secretary, Brandon Davey health and safety assistance manager, Catherine Dopoch substability coordinator, Jan Dring post protection accountant, Darren Giggs second assistant accountant, Siobhan Dolan protection assistant, Karet Agerson snake wrangle, Joe Emmerich set med, Elephanter assistant Udman, Adam Foreman advisor, Max Friedman production assistants, Robin Fakwa paint department, Greg Gabriel production secretary, Melissa Georgem assistant D, Ali Griffith production supervisor, Seth Lecton Hill production assistants, Ben Hall health and safety manager, Teresa Goswell cat assistants, Victoria Handel additional delayage coach, James Hedison stand-in McGill Houseman, James Hinton finance executive, Matt Jacob production assistant, Mark Hoffman video playback supervisor, Region Joms assistant E. Nylon, Angelina Cons animal trainer, Aliana Levin photo double, Elsa Lara health and safety monitor zone, Jamsili additional protection assistants, Dutchley protection assistants, Tony Margues protection assistants, Nathan Maid second assistant accountant, Art Department of Rebel Moon, Jojo Clark concept artist, Paul Baker props assistants, Abdegali Basley set decoration prop shop, Madry Bish mold maker Veta Mark shop, Asan Danglo character designer, Jonathan Bobbitt lead man, Lindsley Bish old maker, Megan Bond set decoration coordinator, Andrew Capel graphic designer, Andrea Carter art department coordinator, J. Andrew Catlu specialist set designer, Andy Choi on set dresser, James C. Chong senior illustrator, Shannon Kaufman set decoration designer, Jordan DeVries props painter, John Deng specialist set designer, Brad Elias property master, Richard Ivan head painter, Robert Fritzman set designer, Garrett Fleming draper, Justin Foster set decorator, Daniel Frank concept artist, Jesse Glan set designer, Shane Green set dresser, Amanda Hart on set dresser, Kyle Hexon Jr. set dresser, James Isaac on props, Tatiana Coulson assistant art director, AI Lavish set dresser, Nathan Longas props, Gerard Martins concept artist, Erica Monzil set dresser, John Smakish graphic designer, Rom Cartridge specialist set designer, Rachel Menchen props, Julie Milliard draper, Brandon Hinton prosper, Eric Nees props, Sam Page set designer, Andreas Prada senior illustrator, Travis Payne painter, Annie Potter set designer, Richard Pauline storyboard artist, Pat Presley concept artist, Caroline Quinn set designer, Andrew Reeder set designer, Shari Raftil specialist set designer, Derek Rennell prop maker, Lily Season digital set designer, Scott Caesar, concept set designer. Craig Saylor, concept artist. Andrew Xavier, props. Helen James Smith, props. Hans Stuto, greensperson. Colin Sabresh, set designer. Amy R. Sucrin, set decorator buyer. Stephen Gorneth, greensman. John Wills, assistant property master. Kyle Mitchell Wilson, props shop. Travis Witzke, model maker. Pace Welder, concept artist. Grace Wang, set designer. Charler Winard, set dresser. Caroline Stetson, assistant crops. Special effects by Darren Borges, special effect technician. Michael Gasper, special effects supervisor. Eric Cook, special effect coordinator. Gene Hathaway, snow effect technician. Daniel Prestige, special effect head of production, beta workshop. Alan Roberts, prosthetician technician. Linus Tableau, special effect product manager. Darian Fisher, special effect. Adrian Sain, mechanical electronics. Christy Fox, special effect business development. Jess Love, special effect technician. Michael Gasper, special effect supervisor. James Lee, additional production manager. Melissa Georgia, assistant designer. Ali Gift, product supervisor. Robin Fekoa, paint department. Max Friedman, production assistants. Aidan Foreman, advisor. Ali Finer, assistant Ian 1. Chris Langer, snake wrangler. Miloni Fabian, health and safety assistant, testing coordinator. Jeremy Fitcher, first assistant accountant. Jean Franspula, covering intimacy coordinator. Susan Friedman, studio teacher. Zack Snyder, director of Rebel Moon, recently claimed that his movie would have made about $1.6 billion at the box office if it had a theatrical release, but that claim was likely misinformed. Rebel Moon received a mixed reception at its release, with critics giving it just 21% on Rotten Tomatoes and audience only leaving positive reviews 58% of the time. Despite the negative reviews, Rebel Moon receives extensive viewerships according to streaming data. Snyder's claims were based on that data, but he made a few errors in his calculations. His claim came when Snyder compared Rebel Moon to Barbie, as he believed that when on Netflix viewership data, more people had seen his movie. He then speculated that if Rebel Moon and has released in theater, it would have received the same viewership on Netflix and earned over $1.6 billion compared to Barbie $1.446 billion. Snyder's claim was misguided through and he misunderstood some of the differences between streaming and theatrical release when he made it. Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon box office commitment ignored the realistic of streaming vs theatrical. Snyder's claim misinterpreted the relationship between streamers and theaters and assumed that the two formats were incompatible, which they are not. Using streaming data as evident, theatrical box office success poses a problem due to the nature of the two formats. Movies are much less likely to receive wide theatrical viewership in the age of streaming because they are far more expensive than a subscription. They are also more inconvenient than streaming release. Our viewers have to physically go to the theater as compared to watching from the comfort of home. Streaming is also a much more accessible format to view movies in as it removes the physical barriers of the theater while also allowing for a customizable experience through subtitle and language selections. All of those factors make streaming more likely to reach a wider audience than theatrical release, and Snyder's calculations fail to account for the differences. While Rebel Moon received a large viewership on Netflix, that success would not necessarily translate to the box office for the reason already listed. Streaming is a much smaller commitment than buying a movie ticket, which likely worked in Rebel Moon's favor. Snyder's claim misinterpreted the relationship between streamers and theaters and assumed that the two formats were interchangeable, which they are not. Even his audience based on Netflix data fails to support his claims. Netflix's approach to data means Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon claim is hard to support. A crucial part of Snyder's calculation came from an assumption he made that each screening was seen by two people. There is no to verify that claim as many people watch Netflix alone, and it's very unlikely that the viewership data from Rebel Moon can accurately be double based on the assumption. Netflix closely guards its viewership data, only releasing those aspects it deems worthy of releasing. That makes it difficult to determine some of the specifics about the data and therefore hard to verify Xander's claim. The main reason that claim is so hard to support is that data only factor is how many viewers put the movie on, not how many finished it. Viewers who turned Rebel Moon on for a few minutes and turned it off are counted the same as those who watched the whole movie through. Many of those could have included people who are on the fence about the movie as well, and they are likely would not have bought a ticket in the theater. While the viewership data is not a perfect way to predict Rebel Moon's hypothetical box office earning, it also doesn't mean that the movie would have flopped. Would Rebel Moon have been a box office success? Zionist's claim about Rebel Moon's hypothetical box office success likely was not accurate, but that doesn't mean that it would not have found success at the box office. Rebel Moon had a lot of things going for it that would have propelled it to success. It has some stunning visual, Zack Snyder's name attached, which brings along the most devoted followers, and Rebel Moon's impressive cast of characters. The proper release dates such as the holiday season also would have given it some longevity in theaters. There is more than enough reason to believe that Rebel Moon would have done fairly well with a theatrical release. Snyder's metric of $1.6 billion is much harder to support tough based on Rebel Moon's budget of $166 million split between both parts, and its less than stellar reviews. It seems unlikely that it could have been such a huge hit. Only two movies in 2023, Barbie and the Super Mario Bros. Movie crossed the 1 million threshold, and both of them spotted a much larger budget and better reviews than Rebel Moon. Based on everything Rebel Moon brought to the table and everything working assistant is, it's likely that the movie had have been successful, but there was almost no chance of it making $1.6 billion. Rebel Moon did succeed but should not be compared to Barbie. By many metrics, Rebel Moon was already a success for both Netflix and Snyder. Rebel Moon was viewed extensively with almost a billion viewership minutes in the first week after its release. It's also surpassed Army of the Dead, Snyder's last Netflix release at its peak viewership. Snyder doesn't need hypothetical box office statistics to justify Rebel Moon. It can already stand on its own. One area it can't start up is, however, is a comparison to Barbie. Rebel Moon was successful in its own right, just not as extensively as Zack Snyder claimed, and not merely as much as Barbie was. By almost every measurement, including reviews, scores, earning, viewership, and more, Barbie beat out Rebel Moon. Perhaps the best example of the difference in the film's receptions come in the form of awards. Barbie won over 175 awards and received over 400 nominations, including 8 Oscar nominations. Rebel Moon, on the other hand, won just 2 awards in total. Barbie was also a cultural event with a huge legacy behind it, while Rebel Moon has had a much lesser lasting impact. Even throwing out Barbie's impressive box office revenue, Rebel Moon still can't hold a candle to its success. Even comparing the two films to each other in the last place is a lesson in futility. Barbie was a strategical, dramatic investigation of feminism and other culturally significant topics. Rebel Moon was an action-packed science fiction adventure. They serve widely different purposes, and pitting them against each other is not a fair comparison. Rebel Moon was successful in its own right, just not as extensively as Zack Snyder claimed and not really as much as Barbie was. Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon Part 2 The Scargiver debuted on Netflix on April 19. Critical fans aside, IndieWire's David Elrich called Part 2 almost as mysterious as Part 1 and gave it a D. Perhaps David's The Real Scargiver, the sequel to the 2023 Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire, became the streamer's biggest film in any language for a week of April 15 to 21. It was watched for 44.2 million hours based on its 2.4 runtime. Netflix translated that to 24.4 million views. On the March 6 episode of the Joe Rogan Experience, Snyder said Rebel Moon Part 1 was seen by more people on Netflix than the smash hit Barbie, in theaters. Say right now, part 1 is like almost 90 million views. 80 or 90s accounts turned it or given Psych Center told Rogan. They assume 2 viewers per second, right? So that's 160 million people supposedly watching. At $10 ticket, that's $1.6 billion. Most people probably saw Rebel Moon, then saw Barbie in the theater. That's how crazy Netflix is. That's the distribution model they have seen up. Cinder math, does it hold up? No. He's here, it doesn't break down. This much we know is true. In 2019, Avenger Endgame set an opinion weekend theoretical record of $357 million in scientists' interpretation of Netflix's assumption of 2 viewers per view. That would mean 42.8 million people watched Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scar Giver, in its first 3 days. So had the film been in theater and all of those semi-hypothetical views each bought of $10 tickets, that's a totally fictitious box office haul of $428 million in 72 hours, more than twice Barbie's open weekend. Correct aside, there's many reasons why it's preferable to believe that Rebel Moon Part 2 would be best of all time pre-COVID. Box office opener by 20%, Cinder would be brand name and it's not to rival peak Marvel, and whoever was waiting for this sequel, they could not rival the masses of fans who had been writing a decade of the conclusion of Avenger Infinity Saga. And while TV viewers per view may not seem unreasonable, is perception that Cinder values at over $2,000 billion. It won that double that already were likely attendance for the same reason that it's silly to compute any Netflix performance with would-be box office reception. It is magnitude easier by every metric to watch a movie on Netflix than to invest the time to invest your room and commit 3 hours to sit in theater. Giving credit where it's due, Xander's Rebel Moon Part 2 also reached Netflix top 10 in 92 countries and put this prequel back onto the global list number 5. It did well. Cinder now has 3 constructive number 1 film on Netflix, the 2 Rebel Moon movies and Army of the Dead. He's had a nice run with Netflix subscribers, but how nice depends on the calculus to which you subscribe. Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire, was Netflix's top movie globally for the week of December 18 to 23 with 23.9 million views. It was again number 1 in the following week, then it added 34 million more views. In the first week of January, Rebel Moon slipped to second place that added another 11.8 million views. It dropped to 8th the next week with 3.9 million views. After that, Rebel Moon fell off the top 10 until Part 2 revived it with another 5.5 million views. We do not yet have viewership status beyond that. Rebel Moon Part 1, A Court of Fire, has not made Netflix all-time most popular 10 films. At present, the threshold here belongs to Extraction with a Netflix estimated 135.7 million views. These days, Cinder is choosing to clarify his perspective when asked by Gizmodo if they are trying to tell Kogan that streaming is more valuable than theatrical distribution. Cinder replied, "Oh no, I would say it's kind of opposite. I was just going by numbers and that are given by Netflix," he continued. People are like, "Oh well, Cinder's crazy, but literally, I just am doing math with this, not anything else. If now we are close to 100 million views, 100 million views times 2 is 200 million views. So people are like Xander disclusion and I am just like, I don't know what to tell you." Reps of Netflix did not immediately respond to IndieWire request for comments. Why Xander still believed that more people streamed Rebel Moon than saw Barbie in theater. He did not deny that Greta Gerwig's movie had a larger impact on pop culture. He went on to explain that the two films' disparate impact on the society is evidence of how much cultural currency movie theaters still have. The cultural significance of Barbie was happened when it was in the theaters, Cinder said. That's when we all took a bite of the Barbie apple and happily. And so my only opinion point is that there were a theatrical zadis, even though maybe more people have eyes on something, he actually short of cultural significance is still directed by theater. Barbie made $1.4 billion at the box office. Crimson is the highest grossing movie ever related by Warner Bros., the distributor of Cinder, Justice League and other DC movies. Barbie has been streaming on Max since December 15, 2023. It has appeared on TV ratings currency meeting Nelsie streaming top 10 list for movies in 3 different weeks. Rebel Moon Part 1 A Child of Fire made the same list 2 times. Rebel Moon Part 2 The Scar-Giver Ending Explained. It's that time again, there's a new Zack Snyder movie on Netflix, and that means we've got some explaining to do. With all the action and adventure of the first Rebel Moon in the bag, the sequel begins pretty much back where we started, only now with more cast members. A stranger adopted daughter of intellectual Conqueror Balzarius and Crot Farm and Korra had released a group of fighters to defend our new ruler home. Yet as they left by Vilsa's Commander Noble for dead at the end of the last film, the group believed the threat he poses has passed. But oh, gentle viewer, we also know that Noble was actually restricted at the last minute, and he is now well on his way to becoming a Balzarius second in command. In order to do that, he for some reason needs to kill Korra dead, very dead. Long story short, Korra and her crew still have plenty to worry about, and we have got about 2 hours of exposition and explanation to shift through. With the space fascinate, we have got a bone to pick us. Closing in, we are here to explain exactly what happens in Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scar-Giver. Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scar-Giver Ending Explained. After all the hubbub of Rebel Moon Part 1, our merry group of warriors return to wait. 3 cheers of our returning heroes, but the dread Commander Noble is bearing down fast. Not only are these farmers going to mount a strategic defense, they are also going to go full 7 samurai and learn to fight in a couple of days. That's right, you have got a Montague, you get a Montague, everyone's got a Montague. Korra's ragged crew of interacted theoretical noblemen turned blacksmith, Tarok, swordsman Nemesis, disgraced farmer, General Titus, rebel soldier Milesius. Exchange traumatic backstory to give us a glimpse at why they are each willing to lay their lives on the line to defend their random village. Meanwhile, Korra and country popkin Gunnar have opted to have an epic love story in their downtime. While in bed with her humble farmman, Korra finally shares it was she herself who killed Princess Issa. If you missed the first chapter, Issa is the daughter of an intellective king, the queen, who was ambushed and murdered by the traitorous Balzarius. This happened essentially because after centuries of war and colonization, their daughter urged them to wreak slightly lesser walk across the costume. These 2 royal hypes agreed to chill out a bit, but Balzarius hated the idea of less war because he sucks. And so he arranged the assassination, facing Korra to gun down a child she'd once protected. Shockingly, she was not willing to take the fall for this. He farmed Korra for the entire ordeal, and that's how she ended up on Veld. Meanwhile, Noble has a single scar on his chest for his near-death experience. When his second-in-command offers to have the surgeon remove it, Noble refuses because he thinks it's cool. The Dreadnought arrive and Noble gives Korra the chance to surrender herself to save the people of Veld. Despite what she knows about these guys and the merchant of cruelty and betrayal, she actually tries to take the deal. But Gunnar refuses. All heck breaks loose and our pair square off against an army. Nemesis dies a heroic death. Jimmy the robot, remember him, finally gets involved after taking his sweet time about it, and slowly he turns against the invalid army, but it takes whole of expedition to make it happen. Korra and Gunnar hope on Noble's spacing ship to prevent him from inheriting the village from space like an absolute child. Action sequence rebound, but long story short, Korra blows up the ship. Noble nearly kills her, but Gunnar saves the day. Noble finally actually dies and everyone cheers. Oh, and Gunnar also dies a heroic death. Thanks for your humble observation of life along the way, Gunnar. You are a real one. The film ends with Korra remembering that Balzarius still exists and promising to take the fight to him in the next movie. What does Rebel Moon's ending mean for the future of the Rebel Moon's verse? Trapped by many critics, ourselves concluded that Rebel Moon draws significant viewership. Indeed, via an interview on the John Rogan Experience, Snyder required that more people probably watch Rebel Moon at home than saw Greta Gerwig smash hit Barbie in the theater. We are still waiting to see the number on that such, but what we do in that film was number 1 on Netflix during the view of its release. For a flick that is basically just 6 or 7 classic movie edited together with some admittedly amazing VFX on top, that is not bad. While it was once assumed that this sequel would wrap the tale of Korra and the humble founder of the world, it doesn't. With the closing scene all but promising a third film to come, and guess that there could be very more Rebel Moon on its way. As of this second, the potential threequel has yet to be granted, but Snyder has encouraged fans to click that double thumbs up button to get Netflix a nod in the direction. Meanwhile, remember that extended Naval War Center cut released about Razi teasing before first film even doubted. In an interview with Collider, Xander noticed that they should be on the way in the late summer, promising ADR R-rated content. This should come as great news for whoever was asking for that. Rebel Moon Part 2. The Scar-Givers ending my wrap up the current story, but Zack Snyder's space opera set up more battles to come. Part 2 opens shortly after Rebel Moon Part 1's ending, where Korra, Sofia Boutella, returns with her band of warriors. Sadly, her declaration of victory is short-lived as she and the villagers soon learn that the Imperium is returning to Veld to seize their food, led by Destruction Admiral Noble Eric Shakrin. Thus, Korra and the others have 5 days to turn the village into a soldier to fight back. The first half of Rebel Moon Part 2 is essentially a training farming montage, but the final drivel and extended battle sequence. This is a bloody fight too, with both the Imperium and the villagers losing and gaining ground in its progress. Some of Korra's warriors fall also, and he flies to the down-out ship hovering about Will to disable it. Korra succeeds in destroying the battleship from within, saving the day. Rebel Moon Part 2's final scene sees the saviors honoring their dead, while Daemon Hanson's General Titus drops a game-changing reveal on Korra about her past. Nemesis and Gunnar are the only rebel to die in the Rebel Moon Part 2 ending. There is a tradition among mission-based movies like Seven Samurai or The Dirty Dozen. The most of the cast will perish in the final. The Scar-Giver's final is a refreshing supervision of this format, because while things look bleak during the final battle, most of Rebel Moon's cast of characters survive. Sadly, Donna Bay's Swordmaster Nemesis and Korra's lover Gunnar are the two major characters who die in Rebel Moon Part 2's final. In Nemesis' case, she was defending a group of villagers while fending off a wave of Imperial swordsmen. Despite putting up a robust defense, Nemesis is overpowered by a soldier who delivers a fatal blow during their bout. A young boy, Nemesis, befriended on Vale, comforts her as she passes, with the warrior finding a degree of peace, allowing her many years seeking vengeance against the Imperium. This boy also reminds Nemesis of her own children who were slain during an Imperium strike in a village not unlike Veld itself. Gunnar is straight up labeled the heart of his Veld by villagers during Rebel Moon Part 2, and he and Korra become sliver, offering some simmering tension. Despite his well-possessed fear of death, Gunnar accompanies Korra and her mission to be Dreadbot, and he is finally wounded during a gunfight with Noble. Gunnar survives just long enough to tell Korra he loves her and to see Devra Bluedex's Reflexes fleet arrive in time to help the village. His body is later creamed alongside Nemesis. Princess Issa is still alive in Rebel Moon Part 2. Rebel Moon Part 2, a child affair, kept parts of Korra's past a mystery, including exactly what happened to Princess Issa. Korra was charged with protecting the young princess, who was considered a demon being, able to bring the dead back to life. A tragic flashback in the Scar-Giver was Korra explaining what happened with Rebel Moon's main villain Regent Balzarius Free Fee, having lured the king, the queen, and Issa into an ambush. The king and queen are stabbed to death while Balzarius faced Korra to shoot Issa to prove her loyalty. Rebel Moon Part 2 underlined that the royal family's assassination is the key trauma of Korra's past, since he completely betrayed Issa to serve her evil foster father Balzarius. Before Korra pulls the trigger, Issa says, "I forgive you," while her bullet wound glows white before she dies. Rebel Moon Part 2 underlined that the royal family assassination is the key trauma of Korra's past, since he completely betrayed Issa. Korra and the other must seek her out. Given that Princess Issa is some kind of life-living elemental being in human form, her survival makes sense. Even though she still pulled the trigger, Issa being alive should lift some of the burden off Korra's shoulder, with our next mission being to find the princess and learn redemption of the king's and queen's death. How Korra finally killed Edie Sakarine's Admiral Noble. Rebel Moon Part 2 proved that Korra's defeat of Noble is the first entry only. Brought her some time. While she did succeed in killing the Admiral, his body was recovered by the Imperium and destructed. He thus returned to Vale seeking vengeance, while Noble even keeps the scar. Korra gives him honor to the mark by the scar giver. Unfortunately for Noble, he failed to learn any lesson from his first round with Korra, so his arrogance and belief in the Imperium separately led to the defeat of his faces and his second death. After a prolonged sword battle in the exploding Dead Knight, Korra trapped the villain using a door before beheaded him. This happened off-screen to keep the PG-13. In fact, Noble might have survived Rebel Moon Part 1, but the beheading in Part 2 suggests his dramatic and a little more permanent his time. Plus, it would be tedious of Xander keep restriction the villain. An issue with the Rebel Moon is that the requirement section moves so fast that the warriors Korra hires broadly have time to get developed. The Scar Giver gives the story more breathing room, showing the outcome embarrassing life in the village as they prepare for the fight ahead. Around Rebel Moon Part 2's midway point, Titus insists they open up about their past before they fight together. Titus reveals he led his men into rebellion against the Imperium after the questioning their attempt to squash a rebellion on the planet of Thrawn. Titus was later forced to surrender, but despite trying to save his men, they were all executed by the Imperium as punishment. Titus remains haunted by the event, which pushes him to fight for Vale, even though it appears to be a total lost cause. Satay's Zayas Trak is the next Rebel Moon hero to reveal his past. Trak was a prince on his homeworld whose father was slain by the Imperium for daring to demand witch terms with them. The Imperium soon invaded Trak's planet, consulted in the death of his mother, while the prince himself was forced into exile to preserve the royal bloodline. Trak feels overwhelming guilt over what happened, claiming he was robbed for a chance to defend his planet. In defending ways he intended to make up for that. Nemesis' peacefully little fishing village was wiped out by Imperium's forces years before. With her entire family being killed, she then cut off her own arms and replaced them with her ancestor Granted, whose blood discusses her sword to burn red hot. Rebel Moon Part 2. Resident swordsman has been living for revenge ever since, but his defendant failed. She finds something worth fighting for again. Korra now has a family and people worth dying for, so she accepts Noble deal and surrenders herself. Rebel Moon takes his cue from films like The Magnificent Seven. The part of the fun is watching the heroes plan for the inevitable showdown. Korra and the others are more than willing to die fighting off the invasion. In the final, Korra has a moment of weakness. The Imperium can't fire on the village without destroying the food they came for, so Noble offers her the deal. If Korra sends herself and the food, Noble and his forces will leave with no bloodshed. They test Korra's resolve since she has come to accept Wade at her home. Korra has our family and people worth dying for, so she accepts Noble's deal and surrenders herself. Gunnar knows the Admiral cannot be trusted, so he takes matters out of Korra's hand. He shoots the village bell, leading to Rebel Moon's Part 2 extended final action sequences. Of course, had Korra simply surrendered, Noble probably would have delivered the planet out of the spite anyway. Ray Fisher's Rebel Moon Part 2 cameo explain. Ray Fisher's Darian Bloods made a late entry and an early exit in the Rebel Moon Part 1. Bloodaxe was a resistance fighter who played to aid Welt, but was soon slain in the battle during Part 1's final. In the second chapter, Elsie Duffy reprises the role of Melius, one of Bloodaxe's royal label. During the story, Melius recalls how their farm was taken over by Imperium with the planet forces into slave labor. This is where they first made Blood Dogs, whose forces liberated the world camp. Ray Fisher's Blood Dogs gets a suitable Midas close-up during the flashback, as Melius remembers seeing him for the first time. Though Fisher doesn't get any actual dialogue, this scene further explains why Melius was so devoted to Blood Dogs, while the struggle of Wade remained them for what happened to their own planet. JC-1435 Eka Jimmy is a combat android created to save the royal family. When the cave was slain, Jimmy was left with little purpose. But in Rebel Moon Part 1, he helped to overpower the Imperial men left on Veld when they turned violent. Having taken a life weight heavily on the android, so Jimmy isolates himself throughout the Scargiver despite seeing the villager preparation for battle. He even speaks with Kira about the upcoming showdown, but seemingly wants no part in it. During Part 2, Fena the rebels on the verge of losing as the Imperium sends in attack. When all appears lost, Jimmy suddenly appears and uses his superior combat skill to slay dozens of soldiers before disabling the tank. In this moment, Jimmy resigns his sense of self-worth and decides he can still be service despite what his original programming might claim. How the ending gets a feature Rebel Moon movies. Zyxander raised eyebrows when he proclaimed he had 6 movies in mind for Rebel Moon via radio time. By the Scargiven and release, there is more story left to tell. The final season release Isil Isa Princess is alive as Korra and the others set out on a mission to find her. Once news of the rebel victory on Vale spread, it will no doubt inspire unsurprising our other planets too, in addition to the Imperium itself seeking revenge. More than that, Regent Balzarius is still around, so a showdown between Korra, Arthelis and her tyrant foster father is inevitable. The flashback to Balzarius slaughtering the royal family reveals the set Korra to take the fall, which is why she faded into the first place. Despite then, once she had the villain of Rebel Moons, she should not take the shot. Balzarius is the overarching villain of Rebel Moon's universe, so the saga will not end until he is defeated. The question remains whether Korra has and he will to kill him next time. However, the real meaning of Rebel Moon Part 2, the Scargiver's ending. Korra's arc across Rebel Moon's first 2 chapters involves accepting Veld as her new home, as that she deserves to feel loved. Decades of fighting numbered her to the notion of love, but in the coming part of the village and falling for Gunnar, she embraced her humanity again. Korra learns to forgive herself for the past and killing Issa and proves she is more than a killing machine for the Imperium by saving her new home. The same is true for all Rebel Moon Part 2 the Scargiver heroes, most of whom feel in immense guilt or shame for their past action. They all stay and fight despite facing certain defeat. The nice thing about the sequel ending is that the rebels don't have to die to earn redemption either. Gunnar and Nemesis meet their end, but most of the rebels live to fight another day. Their fate is battling for just cause rewarded. The Rebel Moon 2 ending is packed with action after the Imperium led by Admiral Noble shows up on Veld. Korra and the other fight back. The plane leads Korra and Gunnar, who have recently shifted from friends to lover, to the dreadnought above when Korra plants explosive at the heart of the ship and detonates them just in the time to knock the weapon off course and spare Veld. Things comes to a head when Korra and Noble have a dramatic showdown and the dreadnought and it crashes. The battle is out with sword drawn and ultimately it's looked like game over for Korra as Noble almost kills her. Until Gurav arrives and saves her, Korra takes her swords and beheads. Noble thoughts remain too, but itself she is really dead for good at this time. Tragically, Gunnar has shot in the battle and dies when he and Korra get back down to Veld. Nemesis also perishes in the fighting. As for the war on Veld, the Blue Decks arrive in the time to repel the Imperium's forces, meaning the village live to see another day. The movie comes to an end with General Titus informing Korra that she did not in fact kill Princess Issa as she believes. The princess is alive and the closing moment of the film suggests the next quest will be finding her.